of the speaker, but only members of the working press or actual members of the press club can ask questions. So we ask you to abide by that, please. And it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker today. It is John Weibel, Dr. John Weibel. He has more than 28 years of service as an advocate for education, health care, quality of life, and economic dependence of all citizens. He joined the Center for Development and Learning in 2019 and soon embarked on updating the organization's name, mission, and vision to speak more clearly about the organization. So now it's called the Center for Literacy and Learning. Dr. Weibel is bringing forward an aggressive vision for the organization where all students are provided a strong foundation for lifelong learning through literacy comprehension and fluency, beginning with quality programming and support in early childhood development. It is my pleasure to give you Dr. John Weibel.
Good afternoon. Is everyone doing okay today? I know as an organization and as a group, you get many speakers who stand right here and tell you, I'm going to speak to you today about Louisiana's most critical issue. And I'm here to tell you that I am going to speak to you today about Louisiana's most critical issue. Except we have the data, we have generations of poor outcomes, generations of low educational attainment, and generations of poverty to back this claim up. There is no more critical issue to Louisiana right now than the intersection of literacy and economic development. We've proven over generations that we can mortgage our children's future. We can give everything away that we want to. Need a highway? We'll build it. Need a port? You got it. Need tax incentives? You can have it. I'm not going to touch that today. But the fact remains, until we have the employable and viable workforce, we will continue to mortgage our children's future away. That intersection is literacy and economic development. And good afternoon again. It is a great opportunity to be here for you, with you this afternoon. And I do want to touch on three main points today. One, I want to tell you a little bit about the Center for Literacy and Learning. And then I also want to talk about literacy and economic development. But then I want to end with some of the bills and the packages that we're working on this session. The Center for Literacy and Learning has been around for 30 years. 1992, we are celebrating our 30th anniversary this year. We have on our staff a combined 386 years of education experience and expertise. From the classroom to literacy specialists to coaches, and we're positioned throughout Louisiana. And although we're a Louisiana nonprofit, up until about 3 years ago, the majority of our work was actually done outside of Louisiana. We're a national organization. We provide training to educational systems and programs across the country, from East Coast to West Coast. We also host one of the largest literacy and early learning conferences in the nation. March 8th through the 10th, 2023, we will have our 28th institute called Plain Talk About Literacy and Learning Institute. It will be in New Orleans. Last year, our first year back after the pandemic, we had close to 1,800 attendees attend this conference in New Orleans in early February, just a few months ago. It's an international conference. We have attendees from multiple countries. We have keynote speakers from all over the world that all come here to Louisiana for the Plain Talk Institute about literacy and learning to understand how can we provide better instruction and support to early learners in the classroom around literacy. It's a great opportunity for us in our conference. One of the things that's important to know, like so many other great things, while we have a 30-year history, we began because of one parent. One individual had a vision. She was an educator, she is an educator, and she had children who had exceptional learning abilities. And she saw that those needs in the classroom weren't being met around early learning and literacy. And she made a commitment to begin a movement to do something about it. And here we are 30 years later, rather. See, part of the crisis, part of the most critical issue is in our reality, 1 in 4 fourth graders, 1 in 4 fourth graders are strong, proficient readers, according to national assessments. 1 in 4. Now, there's some state testing that'll tell you, 50, 60% of our students are reading on grade level. But according to national assessments, which we use to gauge how we are doing against other states, 1 in 4, not just readers, but strong, proficient readers. Why is that critical? Well, we understand by age 3, close to 90% of the brain has been developed. By age 8, 90 to 95% of that brain is developed. We understand the critical nature of those early years and how we create a strong foundation to be a strong reader. Because you see, from birth to 8, you're learning to read. After you get to 4th grade on, you're reading to learn. It's a critical juncture in that young person's life, and we have to do something about it. The tragedy in all of this is, as a country, we're not doing much better. 1 in 3 students across this country are strong, proficient readers by 4th grade. So while Louisiana is near the bottom, misery loves company, right? As a nation, we're not doing very well. So the opportunity there is to catch up, to go from the 1 in 4 to at least the 1 in 3 and then beyond. And I'll talk about how we can do that in just a little bit. We've had a lot of attention turned towards COVID and its impact on learning, a lot of learning loss. And that's a real phenomenon, if you will. It's a reality that our teachers are having to face, that our students are having to face, and families are having to face. But the reality is, we were not doing well before the pandemic. In fact, we have data, and you have it in your packet, that from 2018 to 2020, which part of that, of course, is before the pandemic, we were already doing poorly with our outcomes. In other words, the number of children and students reading on grade level was actually decreasing from 18 to 19, 19 to 20. So while the pandemic certainly exacerbated things for us, we were having challenges long before then. When we talk about 3rd grade being the critical piece, being the critical juncture, then we also have to talk about the research behind literacy and why it's so critical. We understand that the impacts of literacy span beyond just poor grades in schools, but it affects all aspects of a person and their community in terms of access, in terms of opportunities. I hinted at it earlier, the economic viability of our state. When we talk about the economic viability of Louisiana, yes, we have to talk about infrastructure. We have to talk about transportation, capacity, quality of life, reasons for families to live here and to stay here. But in that infrastructure, in that quality of life, is the opportunity to ensure that our students are literate, not only literate, but strong, proficient readers as they move beyond third grade into graduation and such. We know from research that a mother's ability to read, her status as literate or illiterate, directly impacts her children's health. We know that from research. We know that literacy increases an individual's ability to access and understand basic health care. We know socially that people who are completely or functionally illiterate face the prospect of economic dependency and lack of social cohesion throughout their life. We know civically that people who have low literacy attainment are illiterate. And we hosted a series of lunch and learns around literacy and economic development. We took this topic and this conversation to every corner of Louisiana. And the whole reason, or part of the impetus of why we did this, is a national report that was released a few years ago by the Business Roundtable on why reading matters. And while we talk about, from an educational perspective, the challenges and the needs to address illiteracy, the Business Roundtable is a group of private business and corporate CEOs, some of the most successful in this country and around the globe. These individuals, these business leaders, got together and produced this report in 2016, Why Reading Matters. And from this report, and remember, these are not educators per se, but these are business and industry leaders. These folks represent a significant chunk of our economy and millions of employees in our country. And they found and supported the idea that improving third grade reading proficiency is uniquely powerful to address the skill gaps over the long term. They also found that reading is one of the most commonly and intensively used skills among all types of jobs. Economic returns from reading are proficiently higher in the U.S. than in other developed countries. What that means is, as a nation, remember, these very successful business and industry leaders are saying, we have the quickest and the most to gain by investing in literacy as an industrialized nation, that we have to look at the literacy attainment of our students and how it affects our economy. They also emphasize in their report that strong reading skills are required as a foundational knowledge for STEM. We hear, we see, and rightfully so, a lot of attention on STEM, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, all of those things. And those areas are critical. But to be successful in those areas, you have to be a strong, proficient reader. And we need you, every student, to be a strong, proficient reader by the end of third grade. When we talk about the economic impact, students who are not strong, proficient readers by fourth grade are significantly less likely to graduate high school. They're significantly more likely to engage in at-risk behaviors. Over their lifetime, a student or a young adult who does not graduate high school loses over a quarter of 260,000 rather of potential lifetime earnings in their income. And then we know from the last numbers the department reported, which was right before COVID, at that time we were spending $270 million a year on remediation and support for struggling readers. And some of that has changed recently, and I'll talk about that when I talk about some of our legislation. The key question is, are we okay with 1 in 4 fourth graders reading proficiently at that point? Is that something we're willing as a state to live with? And that's the answer that we've got to address. You know, when you look at the history of the Center for Literacy and Learning, and I mentioned earlier we're turning 30 this year, the center has long been a leader in policy reforms and legislation to change how we instruct and teach young learners, and particularly in the area of literacy. You may hear reference so often to the Early Literacy Commission, where a lot of the recommendations that are now legislation that either passed last year or working through the process this year. The Early Literacy Commission was a project that this organization, the center, led and pushed for in 2019. We worked with the department, we worked with our legislative partners, and we were able to find support for an Early Literacy Commission. Last year, we renewed that commission for another 2 years. So a lot of the recommendations you're seeing is a result of the work of that commission, which this organization helped to lead, to create. We do so because at the center, we believe in the power of literacy to change lives, and we work tirelessly with partners across sectors to support literacy initiatives today to ensure gains for our students and our state and our nation. And I mentioned earlier, we have 30 years of service and a simple yet powerful vision. We believe everyone is empowered through literacy. We're working to advance literacy and learning in the classroom. And we know that there's a blueprint waiting for us. That blueprint, believe it or not, is the state of Mississippi. Some folks get tired of us talking about the state of Mississippi. In 2013, we could have said, well, at least we're ahead of Mississippi. In 2019, do you know who was the #1 state in improvement among students in literacy in the nation? You guessed it, Mississippi. Now they're outperforming the national averages. Mississippi. If there was ever an apples to apples comparison for Louisiana, it's Mississippi. I'm born and raised in Louisiana. I've raised my own children here. I lived a few years in Mississippi pursuing a doctoral degree, worked there, worked with a whole network of universities. I know Mississippi very well. And I can tell you, there has never been a more perfect apples to apples comparison. And so by following elements of that model, we can improve. And a lot of it starts in the early childhood space, which we advocate for. Increase access to quality early childhood. We worked with legislative partners last year to help pass key legislation to make sure all of our teachers in K-5 are educated in the science of reading. And I don't have time today to explain carefully, or thoroughly rather, the science of reading, but that's something I'd be happy to talk with you some more about. I also wanted to touch, as I mentioned that earlier, a little bit on some legislation we're working. And so on our website, which you have all of that information in front of you, we track on our advocacy page all of the bills that we're working and that are priorities for us. But I want to highlight just a few because I believe my time to speak is wrapping up, and then it'll be Q&A for us. 3 bills by Representative Richard Nelson, Representative Nelson from the Mandeville area. House Bill 214 requires passage of a reading instruction test as a condition of teacher certification. We believe every teacher in K-5 should be certified in literacy reading instruction. And that certification is grounded in the science of reading. It's helping those teachers understand the correlation between brain development and how we develop strong readers. That's a good one. Of course, it's a good one. And this is part of the Mississippi model. Representative Nelson also has a bill, House Bill 865, that would prohibit any curriculum or materials that's not aligned with the science of reading. And not to get too much into the weeds on that, but it would prohibit this idea that we can provide visual clues and pictures and students learn how to read on their own. I'm oversimplifying it, but that's essentially, as a non-educator, how to understand that bill. So it would prohibit that type of curriculum, which we think is obviously very good. Another one that he has authored that we're supporting that might be a little tougher as we prepare for Senate education, hopefully this week, is House Bill 269. There was an article over the weekend, you probably saw it. It would prohibit promotion of students from 3rd to 4th grade unless those students with reading deficiencies. And these are the students who would be in most significant need of interventions and support. Now, to talk a little bit about that bill and what it does, let me say what it doesn't do. It doesn't take away the decision-making authority of the local school districts. It just gives them further guidance on how to make those decisions. It doesn't prevent a local school district from retaining a student earlier. 2nd grade, 1st grade, kindergarten. What it does is it places emphasis on the realities, on the science that our 3rd graders need to be leaving 3rd grade, entering 4th grade as strong, proficient readers. It's that important. It provides the interventions and the supports and the guidance that local school districts will need to ensure that this is happening. A couple of other bills I really want to mention very quickly. Representative Jason Hughes has a bill, HB 911, that provides a lot of interventions and services in the early grades, helps to encourage and create opportunities for local schools to have literacy coaches throughout the state. All of these pieces, including the Nelson bills, are pieces that came from the Mississippi model that we want to implement here. Training teachers, ensuring we have science of reading curriculum, and then ensuring that our students are only being promoted to 4th grade and beyond when they're strong readers. Representative Hughes, Representative Schlegel has another bill, also has a bill that she is working through, HB 852, that would actually put books in the hands of struggling readers that they can take home and they own. That book distribution we feel is very important. And then Representative Marino has a couple bills addressing dyslexia and that issue. So I feel like, I have about 2 hours more of information I'd love to share with you, but I feel as though I better not do that, and but would be happy to answer any questions that you may have at this point. Yes, sir.
Is it appropriate for the legislature to set some sort of promotion requirements with Bessie is supposed to have the constitutional authority to run these things? And I know that Bessie, I think, according to the paper, had no position on this one.
Right.
Particular bill. But at the same time, has this, in other words, has this legislation gone through channels in the sense of the educators who have to achieve those goals?
Like in terms of channels of research and the science behind the legislation, or the
Who gets to make who has to constitutionally make the decision?
right. And so the bill does provide for that sense, that autonomy at the local level. It addresses students with exceptionalities, students that would have IEPs and such. This is targeting those students, targeting supports and interventions for those students who are most in need, who are most struggling as readers as those early grades. And again, to go back to what was done in Mississippi, and to be completely transparent, this was a tough sell in Mississippi as well, and that's why we're using a 2-year window to runway this legislation, an opportunity to educate parents, educate local communities, and really allow them to see the value in ensuring that all of our students are strong readers by the end of that 3rd grade period. Yes, sir.
I taught freshman English for a number of semesters, and I used to do a thing at the beginning where I asked them to turn over this form they had to fill out and write down the things they read on a regular basis. They didn't read much. And so they had really, I realized later, no feel for the structure of language or the logic of language. Are we losing the battle even more today? I mean, this was the 1970s. How can we stem that tide or work against it?
So I think the question is, how are we doing today compared to maybe a time when you were in the classroom, and in terms of structural?
Can we gain ground?
Can we gain ground? I think we can, because while things are different today in the classroom, certainly than when any of us were in the classroom, we also have a lot of information. We have a lot more research and science behind what we're doing. And while that doesn't, I think that helps to inform that instruction in the classroom. Like we're more attuned to, I don't think we were attuned 20 years ago, at least generally speaking, the correlation between brain development and a child's ability to learn to read and comprehend, and the fluency and all of the blends and such that goes with it. So are students and teenagers in particular different today? Of course. We're living in a different time, but I think the ability to get our students where they need to be is right there, right there. We have to remember the state of Mississippi from 2013 to 2019 went from worst in the nation to above national averages. And so we have the model, we have the opportunity in front of us. We just have to have the will to make that happen. Yes, sir.
So the science that neuroscience that you referred to is a 3-year, grade 3 to grade 4 jump point of learning to read to how did you phrase it? To reading to learn.
Yes, yes, sir.
So that neuroscience has been known for a long time.
Right.
Correct? Okay. So, in listening to you, is the goal of the center to create a buy-in by the education system, to buy into this process improvement, to literally change the way teachers are enabling students at that critical point between the 3rd and 4th grade?
So the question was the buy-in with the local K-12s and our work as a center to get.
Is it a neuroscience and process that needs to be
Right.
at the teacher, well, at the institution level, but it has to be implemented by the teacher?
Exactly, and that's a great question. I think from a lot of our educator partners, the buy-in is there. We see it in all of the programming we do, when we do our conference, when we do any outreach. We work with a number of school districts across this state and across the country, and the educators have the buy-in. It's sometimes trying to get those reforms institutionalized, and then sometimes you have to do it through legislation. So I think there's a lot of support and buy-in for this work. We have to make sure that legislation and policy follows those reforms and that research.
So what's then
you know, to be oversimplistic, I think change in general is difficult to overcome, especially when we're working with sometimes, you know, governmental partners, institutions that really have become accustomed to whether it's a certain curriculum, a certain pedagogy, or whatever the case may be. We have to be able to take that information, take that foundation of science and research, and continue to implement those changes, working through local leadership. And that's one of the things we do. We have a Literacy Leadership Academy. We kicked it off last year that we work with. And we work with school and district-based leadership to help them implement literacy plans that are comprehensive across those campuses. So it's not just a matter of a second or third grade teacher understanding what we need to do to improve literacy, but it's a matter of helping every teacher on every campus understand what their role may be in improving literacy, reading comprehension, and such, especially coming off the heels of the pandemic, because we are facing a situation where teachers in older grades may be getting students who are struggling just a little more in literacy because of the disruption in their educational process over the last 2 years now. Yes, sir.
The Mississippi program that you're referring to, how does it engage the parents of those children who are at risk of missing the proficiency goals in time?
The question is, how does the Mississippi program engage parents in the homes? And I'll say this. We know that that's the critical piece in all of this. We recognize it. We understand. We know sometimes it's easier to legislate the classroom and the K-12 campus than it is the home. And we're not advocating for legislating the home. Let me be clear about that. But we also understand the more that we can support parents in their child's educational journey, the more successful that child will be. I will say this to all my friends in Mississippi, I think that's one of the areas we're doing better. They had some opportunities early on to engage parents and engage communities through some of their reforms, but I think we've taken that bull by the horn, if you will, very early on. We do a lot of parent engagement work. The reality is this: in a state where we've had generations of poor outcomes, generations of low educational attainment, many of our parents themselves are struggling readers. So we talk and we work a lot as a team. How do we support parents? How do we empower them? Give them the confidence to sit there and read with their child 15, 20 minutes a day. And the expectation is not you need to teach your child how to read at home. The expectation and the hope is by engaging with your child at home, we can increase outcomes and their success throughout life. And that's really where we're focused on. We believe that parent engagement piece is critical, but if it's never been done with you growing up, chances are you don't wake up one day magically and say, you know, I think I'm going to start reading to my children more. It's a process. It's how do we empower communities and such, and we're working on a number of programs to do that.
If I can add also, the bills that we were speaking of, Representative Nelson, they call for the parents to be a part of the partnership to make the change. They're notified, they're along the process.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
A small question, but I haven't had time to dig into the fine print. But you made a reference to the grade level versus national assessments. I would presume you mean NAEP.
NAEP, yes, thank you.
And that those are the kind of, that you're comparing NAEP to the LEAP outcome.
Right. And you know, we're the center, we're not the department, so we might have an opinion or feelings on things, but I mean, we see, you know, our educators and myself as an educational advocate, we see value in knowing where are Louisiana students compared to the rest of the nation. Because, you know, this is one of the things I think we've got to understand as a state. We might have poor children and poor communities and poor families, but it doesn't mean we have to have poor dreams and poor visions. And I think if we're going to turn things around in Louisiana, we have to do it through the education piece. And foundationally, we have to start at that third grade piece. And, you know, my thing is, don't take educators' words for it. Look at some of the business and industry leaders in this nation, this country, the Business Roundtable, and how they've been adamant champions. Do we want an employable workforce tomorrow? I do. But where are we going to get there? We can work on that workforce right now while we also support and focus that early childhood space, that foundation. Yes, sir.
Yes, I have two questions. Do they still give out like baby's first book at the hospital when they release the mother and the family? Question number one.
Okay, the one question is about books at hospitals to new families. We're not aware of that. We have a program, a parent engagement program. It's called Louisiana Reads, and we're doing a multiple event strategies to promote Louisiana Reads, whether it's book distribution. We're developing an app because a lot of young parents, even those who maybe struggle economically, have mobile devices in their hands, and we feel it's a way to meet them where they are. And one of the things we actually were just talking about as we were parking here is we have some hospitals that are interested in piloting programs with us where we could send a book home with every new family and resources to access.
The second thing is, and I supported Khan Academy when it first started about 10 or more years ago. Fabulous deal. Do y'all push that or work with people like Khan Academy?
Yeah, so the question was about Khan Academy. I'm somewhat familiar with that platform, and I know there's a number of resources out there to help parents and to encourage that in-home learning and engagement. And we try to work with a number of partners, from Scholastic Books to other groups. We produce a lot of videos and resources ourselves. I say produce. We create them as educators. We're creative, right? We make things happen, and we get those out, whether it's through our website or with partners. But yes, those types of resources are very critical to increasing that engagement at home.
They have a really good one. I have 7 grandkids, and I use Khan Academy Kids, and it's loaded with photographs. So that's why I was curious about that law that you're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not familiar with that piece of it, but what we're talking about specifically here would be curriculum in the K-12 classroom. Yes, sir.
Talking about autism, I think I did somewhere in there. What kind of program, because this proliferates now, I got autism hits every family, it seems like right now. Is there anything in the literacy and learning that will aid autism or parents that are dealing with autistic kids?
So the question was around autism specifically, and those challenges that come with, or opportunities really, that comes with that to educate students and learners. I can tell you one of the things, and one of our policy priorities you will see in the packet is equity in education. And we all have our own definition and vision of what equity is and what it is not. And for us in the education space, equity is simply meeting students where they are and providing them the support and the instruction so they can be their very best. And so to your point, autism, students with dyslexia, other exceptionalities, we have a lot of skills, expertise, certifications on our staff, and we specifically work with K-12 partners, early childhood centers, early child care centers, other partners who will work with us to ensure equity in education, because that's really what it's about. It's that equity piece is so important because we all learn differently. You know, I was growing up, I was big in 4-H. And looking back, I think, well, one, it got me out of the house all the time, which was big. And two, it was always Trey Williams and I were big 4-H buddies back in high school about 5 years ago. You know, that 4-H piece, learn by doing, and I still see that in everything that I do now. You know, give me an instruction manual, and I'm like, oh, no way. Watch you put it together or do it, I'm there, I can do it. And so that's a big part of what we understand, and we know that we want every third grader to be their very best and to be that strong reader by the time they get to fourth grade, because we want them to be successful. And that's what we have to do. And you bring up a great point, that we continue to work with students of all abilities. Sir, Mr. Williams?
You talked about literacy coaches earlier and the school districts that y'all work with. How involved are y'all with school districts? Like, are y'all involved with like 5 or 6, or like how many across the state and teachers and things like that?
Yeah, thank you for that question. We have about 15 literacy specialists all over Louisiana, working with, I think, close to 200 literacy coaches in that regard, working in close to 60 school districts. We're very extensive in our work and our reach. We work with a number of districts. I think the last I saw was those districts represent about 25 to 30,000 students in Louisiana. So our footprint is pretty strong here in Louisiana, and we're really glad to see that opportunity. We've had a great relationship with the department and Dr. Brumley. His vision of literacy kind of helped to working alongside with us, and the Early Literacy Commission that we push for really helped to shine a light on the needs in our state. And the thing is, you know, shifting the conversation away from the classroom. And I know that seems odd. You know, we're addressing an issue like literacy. It's not an academic issue. There are tools in the toolbox that our K-12 partners need to change the projection we're on, but it's really an issue of economics and economic development. And how do we get our state in a position to realize its full potential? Go.
How do you fund all this? This is an expensive undertaking.
Right. Well, so
Maybe even proposing a little more in the education arena after the bill.
yeah, they didn't tell you about the box that you have to go through. You know, all of you on your way out. Yeah, you know, as a nonprofit, I will say this. For 30 years, we've had a tremendous board of trustees who have worked very hard because they believe in literacy and economic development. And so when the pandemic first came, the first instructions I was given by our board chair is, don't let anyone go. And if you need to hire more people, hire them. We'll figure it out. That was their level of commitment. And we did, we pivoted, and we grew over the pandemic because we were bringing learning to the home. And so we do a lot of fee for service. We do have corporate partnerships. We write grants. We do all of those things. We don't have one line item or earmark in the budget yet. I've got, what, 24 hours tomorrow, or maybe, I don't know, maybe conference is a little easier. Yeah. But it's a combination of a lot of different things that we do. And a lot of it is our work with local K-12 districts and such.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Very good, appreciate y'all coming.
Thank you.
I was gonna ask who are the primary opponents in the Richard Nelson bill, and who are the primary